Welcome to the Ben and Lauren Show. Tonight, we're in a sukkah. We're having the Ben and Lauren Show outside tonight because, that's where we're dwelling right now.
We have uncertain lighting.
Yeah, we've got these little motion sensor LED lights, and every so often, if we don't move enough, they shut down. So don't be distracted. It's kind of the only light we have right now.
We have little glow lights around the inside of this canopy that we have up, but we tried turning the camera on with those, and that didn't work out.
Too dark.
It was very dark, as you will probably see if one of our lights shuts off.
So every so often we might go dark. We just have to wave our hand, and it'll.
And we may look like we're in a refugee camp, but that is because we put up a tarp along one wall to block wind and rain. We've had all kinds of weather this week.
Now this weather actually right now is not that cold, not that bad. It's not very windy. It's not raining. It's 40, maybe 45 degrees outside right now.
Yeah, I would guess around that. Maybe 48, 45.
So I may be wearing a really fuzzy hat, but that's just because I get cold easily. This is how I keep warm.
Yeah, we learned an important lesson a couple Sukkots ago. Wear hats.
I slept with this hat on last night, and I woke up with a very warm head.
Well, we've had 2 under 40 degree nights. Three.
We've had a couple very chilly
One went
nights.
down to 35, one went down to 38. Last night was 39.
So the weather has not been perfect. The week prior was really comfortable, and then as soon as Sukkot started,
As soon as we set up the tent.
It got cold.
That's happened to us before in other years.
And then 2 nights in a row it rained, pretty much.
Yeah, we had high wind the one night.
And then the high winds, and
We've had everything this week.
And actually the rain's not so bad. The wind is not so much fun.
The biggest trouble with the rain is that we get confined to just the shelter area, and our kids get bored out of their minds. And they want to go inside. The one day I spent the whole day kicking them out of the house. It's like, no, we're outside, but it's raining. Tough.
Well, it's tempting when you have the house right there.
Right.
You see the shadow of your hand when you do that.
Yeah, I know. It's either that or the light turns off. I'm waving at the motion sensor.
If you wave it over there, you can't see it. Anyway, it's very tempting to go inside the house because it's right there, it's warm, and it's dry, and it's home.
It's home.
So it's like, why bother spending time in the tent in the backyard when you've got a house you can live in, house you can dwell in?
The first night, Elena gets out of bed, and she's really cold. It was very cold the first night, and she comes over to me and she says, I'd like to go sleep in my regular bed now. And I basically said no. And she said, well, fine, but I am not sleeping in the tent tomorrow night. And I said, yes, you are.
So tonight,
in the middle of the night.
So tonight is day 4 of Sukkot. Is that correct? We're going on to day 5?
All I remember is that we have tomorrow and Monday, and tomorrow's the last night.
Okay, so then actually we're entering into the 6th day.
About to be the 7th.
About
and
to be
then
the
the
7th.
8th day is a Sabbath, but at sundown, that's the end of being out in the...
Right. So we're actually entering into the 7th day of Sukkot. And then Monday would be the 8th day.
Right, and that's a Sabbath, so we're not going to take down the tent and everything, but we won't be sleeping out here Monday night. Which is probably good, because Monday night's when we're expecting the thunderstorm that we did not get earlier in the week. That would be the last weather event.
So today the weather was actually quite pleasant, and we're expecting something similar tomorrow. So when you're in a tent, the weather becomes very relevant. You know,
pay attention.
You pay close attention to the weather.
Right. Because however warm it's going to be at night, I dress the kids accordingly. You know, if I know it's going to be 35, I put hand warmers in their beds. I make sure they have all their warm socks on. I dress them in extra layers under their warm pajamas.
So the hand warmers have been very, very useful.
Yeah, we use those like little heating pads. You know, you get those hot pads that you put in mittens and whatever, and we've learned that you put those in the foot of the sleeping bag before the kids climb into bed, and it warms up the feet, which are the hardest part to get warm.
You got this really scary looking hand going on.
Sorry.
You could do shadow puppets in this thing.
Or something. So, like tonight, I think we're only expecting to go down near 50, which it was 50 when we went to bed last night. That was going to drop way lower than that. So.
Oh, that's 50 is comfortable.
Yeah,
it's when it gets in the low 40s or in the 30s that it starts getting...
When it goes down under about 42 degrees, then it gets really cold.
And your bed gets cold.
Right, and you can't.
Your pillow gets cold,
hard to
and
keep it
blankets
warm.
get cold, and lights turn off. We just have to be more animated, and it'll keep the motion sensor going.
Well, the problem is if we aim the lights at us so that they can.
Then we get blinded.
Then we get blinded. We can't see
because these things are really bright. So we got them off-centered.
So that's been our week. We've dealt with interesting weather. Now, a lot of people, if you're camping with other people during Sukkot, there's a lot of activities and stuff that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have the same situation.
But we've done some interesting things. We've gone on a few trips. We've gone to a park that first Sabbath.
And we went to the cider mill.
We went to the cider mill. We went to get apples.
that was an interesting experience. We've been going to the same farm to buy apples to make applesauce with every October for years now. I've easily been going for over 10 years. You can usually get, well, they're called deer apples. You're not supposed to use them for human consumption because they've fallen on the ground. But the fact of the matter is we're boiling them, and there's nothing that's going to survive
There's
that.
this idea that once the apple touches the ground, it's no longer fit for consumption.
Well, it's because of salmonella concerns and E. coli concerns, because you've got manure and other things from animals on the ground, so you're not supposed to eat the apples.
You could wash them.
But both those things die at boiling temperatures, so that's why, because we're cooking the apples, I am really not concerned about.
Now, if we get the timing right, the apples are in pristine shape.
Right. And last year we figured out that around the second or third week of October, it's a great time to get deer apples, because if you get it earlier in the season, what drops on the ground is the subpar fruit. It's the stuff that has bugs in it. It's the stuff that's bruised. It's just not that great. But after it starts getting cold, the apples just drop all their fruit.
Well, we figured that we just had a huge windstorm, and it just probably knocked
It's been cold for a week.
And it's been very cold, so we figured it knocked all the apples down. We were so confident with that assertion, we didn't bother calling before driving out to the farm.
Normally I buy deer apples the first week of October, and last year we found that buying them the third week got us a much better produce. So here we are in the second week of October. We figure we'll just drive out and get some apples.
Well, we drove out there and they had no deer apples.
They didn't even have bushels of regular apples.
Nothing.
And they told us, oh, well, it's too early for deer apples. And I'm like,
what?
Seriously? Apples start coming in the second week of September, and you're telling me a month later it's too early for deer apples? I don't know what the real story is.
Well, either everything's extremely late, or they're telling us a story because their apples are going somewhere else.
They could be making cider out of them.
Cider's probably more profitable for them than selling deer apples.
I'm not exactly sure what happened, but we were not able to get any apples for applesauce.
Well, that would be a shame if they don't sell any deer apples at all.
Well, we're going to have to look for a new source. Maybe High's.
Maybe. But they're a big apple cider maker, too.
I really hope we don't have to find another orchard, because that's really the closest one we can get. That's a normal old orchard, not one that's providing a fall experience, you know, where you go pay an arm and a leg so you can wander around the orchard, take lots of selfies of yourself picking apples, and then ride on all the rides. That's the fall experience farm.
Up the road is a fall experience farm where it's $10 to do everything. You know, you want a pumpkin, $10. You want to go do this, $10. If you want to get into the playground, $10.
Which a lot of people have a lot of fun with.
Yeah.
But if we're looking to buy, 4 bushels of apples because we want to make applesauce, that's not the place to go.
We're more interested in the apples than in the experience.
We go through an incredible amount of applesauce, too.
Right, and we eat the applesauce all
Right.
year long. And that's our experience.
If I open the jar, I have to put limits on my kids, or else they'll eat so much that we'll have them in the bathroom all the next day.
We have a pretty efficient applesauce making method also.
Oh, that's an old method. To use the applesauce mill.
Oh, okay. Well, I was thinking about boiling it with the skins.
Right. That's I think the oldest way to make applesauce, because you can get the most out of it.
Yeah.
So we mill our applesauce. I prefer chunky, where you peel it and cut it up and cook it. But really, the most efficient thing to do is where you just boil the apples pretty much in quarters, and put the whole thing, skins, seeds, and all, through an applesauce mill with a screen, and you get a lot of applesauce out of it.
And we fill up as many quarts as we can.
And we,
And we enjoy it.
I was hoping to do 30 quarts. And since we don't have a new baby yet, I was really thinking, oh, good, we'll get apples and I'll get a jump on this before we have a baby, and I'm going to have to wait for weeks to.
See, I was imagining we'd have the baby by now. Because if the baby was early, the due date, by the way, was a couple days back.
Oh, yeah, we're overdue now.
We're overdue. So
I've been getting texted constantly by people. Any news yet? Like, no, sorry.
I was thinking that the baby would be born by now, either during Sukkot or before Sukkot. And then I would go get the apples right around this time, and then I would do the applesauce while you're laying in bed and recovering from the birth.
I think that's incredibly ambitious of you. I think we'll wait and see how that works out.
Well, it may still work out that way because
Well, we couldn't get apples.
we couldn't get apples.
We may not be able to this year.
So we are on baby watch right now. Now you were having some labor signs, but then as soon as we went into the tent,
As soon as we
it just
started
stopped.
sleeping in the tent, everything that I was experiencing stopped pretty much cold turkey.
I think we may have pushed, or the circumstances may have pushed the birth back a little bit.
That's fine with me.
It's okay.
It's been hard enough keeping Daniel warm. There's no way we could have been out in the tent with a newborn. We would have had to make the decision, how do we dwell in a tent and sleep inside?
I have to say, though, it's pretty cool having Lauren pregnant right about to give birth right around Sukkot.
Why is that so cool?
Because there are some theories out there that Yeshua was born on the first day of Sukkot. Now, we're past that now, but still, this is the season. This is the season for having babies.
Christmas baby, huh?
Yeah. Traditionally, Sukkot is associated with the birth of Yeshua. This is, we should be singing Christmas hymns.
Well, or dressed appropriately.
Yeah, I'm dressed for winter.
It kind of does feel like winter at times right now.
Just no snow.
Nope, it went straight from summer to fall with a few weeks, and now we're heading into winter.
I'm dreaming for a not windy Christmas.
Anyway, so that's pretty much been our week, has been, just dealing with the day-to-day stuff. Everything you're doing when you're in a tent takes longer.
It does.
And just making sure that we manage all the circumstances
and trying to have meals outside is tricky. We don't really have a proper table for meals.
We've been eating a lot of our meals inside, actually, which is funny because most people, if you dwell in a sukkah in the traditional way, you basically set up this shelter that has to have 3 walls and a door and a roof. It has to be made out of natural materials. There's a whole bunch of restrictions for this, and people
you can tell by what's behind us, it's not natural materials.
People basically just eat their meals there. They don't really dwell there.
Mm-hmm.
They make this really pretty spot and they eat their meals in it, and that's considered dwelling.
So it's sort of a symbolic dwelling in.
Right. For us, we try to take it more seriously about dwelling as much as possible, but ironically, one thing that's very difficult to manage with all of our children under the age of 7 is meals.
Yeah.
in the sukkah, because there's not really a good place for them to sit and eat.
So we've been going inside the house, which is kind of nice because getting out of the cold tent and going into into a house that's not as cold.
I've been keeping the furnace way down, though, so we're not tempted to just sit in there and have a shock.
Yeah, the furnace is down to 60 degrees.
Yeah, I had it completely off most days. I've just turned it off, and I set it to 60 at night, mostly because we have our little budgie inside, and I don't want her to get too cold.
But what's funny, though, is after we go in there at 60 degrees, and it feels just so nice.
It feels incredibly warm.
Yeah.
Normally, if it were set at 60 degrees in this type of weather, we'd be inside shivering, going, why isn't the furnace turned up?
But, we have multiple layers of clothes on, and
that's true.
So we've been enjoying some nice breakfasts and lunch. Now, we've had a few meals outside. We've had a few meals in the sukkah, a couple lunches, and I think we had one dinner.
Did we have dinner? Yeah, we had one dinner.
We had one dinner out here. But our Sabbath dinner we had inside.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't get I didn't do my my normal Sabbath pictures, Shabbat Shalom pictures that I do on Facebook. And people started wondering, are you having the baby?
Today I fielded a lot of texts from people. Is there any sign? Is there any news? And I'm like, guys, I'll let you know if there's anything. And people are feeling sorry for me because we're overdue.
No way.
Apparently, I guess for a lot of people, going overdue mentally is just a really difficult thing.
It's a relief for us.
I didn't find it all that difficult with Daniel either until the last couple days before he was born. I kept having labor where I'd go into labor and then it would stop. And I was like, let's just get this over with. This baby needs to be born. What's with the stalling constantly? I was annoyed with the stall.
Yeah.
I was not annoyed with being overdue. But I realized this week that I think one of the reasons that people have a really hard time being overdue is because if you are going to a doctor instead of to a midwife, or if you're going to a more medically inclined midwife, they get really antsy when you go overdue, and they start saying, if you haven't gone into labor on your own, we're going to induce you by the end of this week.
They start putting pressure on you.
And if
and scaring you.
The baby,
like you're doing something wrong.
You could, the baby could, the placenta could deteriorate and the baby could die, and you really
I've
get
never heard of that before.
Yeah, that's that you'll run out of amniotic fluid, and
But
the baby's
how-
lungs will get messed up.
How
and-
long do you have to go past your due date before that starts happening?
Well, there's really not a timetable.
Like a month?
After 43 weeks, like after 3 weeks late, there can be some danger that the placenta does start to deteriorate and the baby could lose oxygen.
So we're not even 1 week late yet.
We aren't even a whole week late yet. And I have a friend who had all her babies pretty much 3 weeks late. So I think
So long story short, we're not worried. We're actually kind of relieved.
So people are saying, oh no, you gotta have that baby, it's late. And I'm like, well,
No.
thank goodness the baby's late, because
We want the
not
baby.
having a newborn is a lot less complicated right now.
Yeah, we want baby to arrive once we go back into the house, and
Yeah, maybe Tuesday or maybe Wednesday after we pack the tent back.
we might have an 8th day baby. I don't know. We'll see.
Well,
But we'd prefer after Sukkot's done, and after the 8th day is done, and after the whole thing's done.
actually, to me, the real thing I was hoping to get past was that really cold weather that we were getting all the rest of the week. Now it's supposed to be fairly pleasant for the next couple days.
Hmm.
And I guess I could see, and it's only 1 or 2 days left of Sukkot. So if we had a new baby tomorrow, say, we'd only be missing 1 day in the Sukkah.
Hmm.
And to me, I would say, well, it
So-
happens.
So the way we're observing Sukkot, Monday was the first day of Sukkot. Sunday night.
Last Monday.
Yeah, last Monday, or Sunday night is when the whole thing started. So that means the 8th day is also on a Monday, so Sunday night, Monday, and we're going to visit some friends on the 8th day.
Yeah, tomorrow night, some friends of ours invited us over to have kind of like a start the Sabbath gathering. And you're supposed to have a convocation and a holy day on the first day of Sukkot and on the 8th day of Sukkot. And the convocating part has been difficult for us if we stay home. It's you have to find somebody who's willing to get together with you.
But we had kind of a fortunate thing happen. Every Sunday we go visit Lauren's family for dinner. And this Sunday, figuring it was the beginning, the kickoff of...
You mean this last Sunday?
Last Sunday. Last Sunday was the kickoff for Sukkot. We said, hey, why don't you bring everyone come over here and we'll celebrate here. Or we'll have dinner here. But it turned into a little bit of a mini party, I thought.
It was nice. We sat outside. People were troopers about sitting outside, even though it was pretty chilly that night.
How many people total?
My family comes out to 20 right now.
Plus our family, plus Benjamin and Leah's family.
Yeah, right. Well, my whole immediate
Yeah.
family is 20 people.
So hosting 20 people, that's a bit much. I mean, it's not a huge amount, but
It's a little crowded for inside our house. But my dad wanted to cook dinner.
got the barbecues going.
My dad's been getting really into making dinner for everybody on Sunday night.
Hmm.
So he made steak. We had the steak in the freezer, actually. That's a funny story. We had that in there for our New Year's dinner that we typically do, but because of illness this year, we have had an entire year, this is October, where we have not been able to get
Almost a year.
our
yeah.
entire family together to have our New Year's dinner.
So, ironically, the first day of the 7th month is traditionally the Jewish New Year.
So we weren't all that late for the Jewish New Year.
Except we don't really recognize the Jewish New Year. We recognize the spring
would.
as the New Year.
Yeah, we would recognize more like.
But I just find that ironic.
So yeah, we did have my whole family over on Sunday evening. That was really nice.
Hmm.
And it did feel like a celebration because everyone came over. And,
Yeah, it really did.
and then tomorrow, hopefully, well, if we're not having a new baby tomorrow, we're gonna go visit some other friends.
So those are the two kind of important days. They're all important days, but the two significant days is the
Right.
first day and the 8th day, because those are Sabbaths and days that you're supposed to convocate with other people and convocate.
Stay on.
And so we're approaching the end of Sukkot now.
Yeah.
I don't know. Everything's just sort of coming together now. We just had a really nice bonfire tonight and campfire. And the sukkah's looking really clean and nice. And just that's what happens. It takes about a week to get everything situated, and then
everything's
it's
settled
over.
Well, I thought everything went really well this year in that there was a lot of things that could have been difficult that weren't.
Hmm.
The day that it rained all day, we had a day where it was just pretty much solid rain. That could have been difficult, but we've learned a lot more about how to make things weatherproof, and
We're hearing reports that a lot of people had some inclement weather.
it was a rough Sukkot for a lot of people as far as weather was concerned. Now, I know our friends down in Arkansas, they had really rough setup, But it looks like the rest of this week has been very pleasant for them. It looks like in
Well, we
70s
saw them
and
walking around pretty much in shorts, so
short sleeves and
it's
sunny.
a lot
and
warmer
so
down there.
they've had a pretty pleasant time. I talked to some other friends of ours from Bible study today. One group is in Ohio, and I can't remember where the other group is.
Texas.
It-
That's where the Turners are in Texas.
That's where the Turners are
Yeah.
in Texas. I guess everything has been going really smoothly down there.
Good.
Although that host family has some challenges that they're dealing with.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, they have the daughter who just had the surgery.
That's right.
They have a daughter who had some very serious surgery, and they're hosting lots and lots of people for Sukkot.
So we would have liked to have them visit our sukkah, but that's okay.
They're busy.
They're busy. They're off traveling for the
Right.
holidays, and we normally travel for Sukkot too. Every other year we alternate, home away, home away.
My mom asked me why we do that, why we travel, and it's like, well, it's practice. We really can't go to Jerusalem. We don't have the resources to go, and it's a practice to do that. It's a holiday where you are intended to travel and to dwell away from your home. And when you dwell in your own home, it isn't.
So if we
the same.
had the resources to go to Jerusalem, even though they're not really expecting us, even though there's really no accommodations, I mean, camping, there's no camping in Jerusalem unless you find a park and just kind of act like a homeless family.
Well, it
for a
sounded
week.
like the one hostel allowed the one family to camp up on the roof.
So you'd really have to
You'd have to
do
really
some
research.
finagling and
There's people I think who you could make it work with.
yeah. But
Maybe someday.
someday, we heard a testimony about a family that's been doing Sukkot for a long time now.
They did have their baby in a tent.
And they
in
did have a
Sukkot-
baby
in
during
Jerusalem
Sukkot.
one year.
In a tent in Jerusalem. Yeah.
That takes more guts, I think, than I have.
Yeah,
That's
that takes an enormous amount of faith. I mean, we're home and we don't want to have a baby in a tent. Let alone in a foreign, I wouldn't say foreign, but,
country
Jerusalem.
where you don't really speak the language.
Yeah, different language, different culture.
On the roof.
On the roof of some stranger's house. I don't know.
No, I didn't.
It would be nice to go to Jerusalem for Sukkot. I mean,
I'm glad we're not there for this year for Sukkot.
we don't know if God's name is placed there. I mean, some people will say it is, but there is no temple. It's a secular state. So
Basically, the commandment was to go to the place where God set His name for every man.
and there's no commandment to go to Jerusalem.
No, but it has to be where God set His name.
Right.
And that, for many years, was Shiloh. Then it was Jerusalem. And
What is it now? That's the question.
we don't know.
We don't know.
So it's uncertain whether that part of the commandment can be fulfilled. And this, in many people's mind, is a reason why you shouldn't keep the command at all. Because you can't do it properly. You can't offer the sacrifices. You can't go to the right place. And in our minds, we sort of think of Daniel.
Daniel? Oh, yeah.
Daniel in the Bible, who was, exiled to Babylon, couldn't do anything the way it was supposed to be, couldn't offer sacrifices. So his solution was he would pray toward the temple 3 times a day at the times of the sacrifices. And he did things to remember and to guard God's commandments to the very best of his ability. And God loved him very, very much for his love.
So what we're doing is we're marking the time. And God said to dwell in booths, so that's what we're practicing doing. We're practicing dwelling in booths, even if we're not doing it 100%.
Right, and that's where we don't know for sure if it would be wise of us to try to go to Israel and to go to Jerusalem, because that's the last place we know of that God set His name.
And it would be a pilgrimage.
And it would be, but then it would have to be done every year. You can't just do it once.
Not just
and
every
then-
year, 3 times a year.
Yeah, you'd have to go Passover and Shavuot and Tabernacles. Although I think I would aim for Tabernacles because that is the Feast of the Nations.
Right.
But there's logistics that we can't conquer yet, so we're doing the best we can do.
And the people in Jerusalem are not 100% okay with it.
There's that too.
I mean, it's a mix.
Well, it's not really, in some ways it's like it's not up to them to decide what you do to honor God.
No, but you're entering their city, so to speak.
Right, their territory, and they have enough flack to deal with as it is, They get beat up by everybody.
Maybe someday so many people will be celebrating Sukkot in Jerusalem that it's like a refugee camp type situation.
Oh, can you imagine?
But knowing that everyone's going to leave in a week, it's they'll tolerate it.
It would be rough.
And they'll probably leave the campsites really nice and neat. You would think.
Well, I've talked to other people who run campsites, and even people who want to claim that they're following God can be messy.
Well, my observation was we ended up staying at the American Homestead Sukkot an extra day when most people left. So we had the opportunity the following day to kind of walk around the field, and it was spick and span. I mean, every so often you might find a tent stake.
That wasn't so good because that can mess up their tires.
Yeah, you got to be careful with that. But for the most part, there was no garbage. There was no debris.
People were careful. But
People were very careful. But you can see depressions in the grass where all the tents used to be. I mean, you put 100 people in a field for a week, you know, and fire pits and everything else. But, you know, even the stones were all put away.
Yeah.
Everything was cleaned up really nicely.
So it's true, maybe perhaps it wouldn't be such a messy thing, but I'm not sure about that. People are people.
People are people.
Even ones who say they want to follow God's commands.
Well, you know, when our campsite's all cleaned up, it'll look nice. Because it's our backyard, and our backyard's not very big.
No.
So we have to, pretty much.
We have to reseed the whole backyard.
Yeah. So we have Creeping Charlie in a section of our yard, so we're not too concerned about tarps and hay bales and straw bales. And, you know, matting down the grass, because it's mostly Creeping Charlie that's just going to get eradicated anyway.
No.
So that's been Sukkot this week. That's pretty much mostly what we've been doing this week is Sukkot. Things outside.
Yep. Making the effort to be outside all the time, every day. I was actually hoping that I could sort of putter around and get, you know, last of the garden stuff cleaned up on days that weren't Sabbaths.
But
and I've had my hands full just managing.
I thought I'd get a fence finished this week.
You've been saying that every week.
I figured if I was outside, not far away. Actually, that is the project for tomorrow. Is at least get some progress on that.
I find that just managing getting everybody dressed in their warm clothes in the morning, keeping the kids busy, making sure nobody sneaks in the house and tries to stay there, getting meals made. I'm caring for the two houses together, caring for the tent and the
We've
the
had multiple
dwelling.
Sabbaths too that we've been cleaning the house, and you'd think the house would be nice and clean, but we're in and out of the house.
It's amazing how messy the big house gets. Just people going in.
Yeah, you'd think that if we're managing our outdoor house, then our indoor house would stay clean. But
Well, here, the kids say, let's draw. So they go inside, they get a pile of paper, and they get a bunch of pencils and markers, and they bring them out to the sukkah, and they're drawing. And then they say they go put them away. Well, you go inside, you find paper all over the floor. You find half the markers put away, half the pencils put away. The rest are all on the table, and some have fallen on the floor.
yeah.
So you got to call everybody in and say, okay, pick up all the papers, pick up all the markers, pick up all the...
And this is in our real home, not our sukkah.
Right, and then it come back out to the canopy. We got to get all the papers picked up out here. So there's stuff like that going on all the time. So I gave the kids a break from schoolwork this week. just to be able to keep up with everything.
So we read the Torah portion that's traditional for the Sabbath during Sukkot. But there's been a couple thoughts having to do with Sukkot itself. Right? I had kind of an aha moment just today, actually, when I realized that the very first station, there's 42 stations that the children of Israel went to as they left Egypt after the Passover. And the very first station, while they're still in Egypt, is called Sukkot.
It was Jacob's stopping place.
So when God says, you shall... the whole commandment about Sukkot is the reason why you're doing it is so you can remember when you dwelled in Sukkot, which we translate as you dwelled in tents or you dwelled in booths.
Temporary dwellings.
But could it be that he says that you remember when you dwelled in Sukkot?
After leaving Egypt, it's possible.
I mean,
except they were only there for a night.
We don't know. It doesn't say.
Yes, it does.
It doesn't say how long they were there. I just looked it up. It doesn't actually say how long they were there. It just says that they went from there to here to here to there. It doesn't give any time frame at all about how long they were there.
But why would they stop in Sukkot? They were on their way to leaving Egypt, and they hadn't really left yet.
I don't know. But this I do know. They just got done raiding Egypt.
And they had just been freed.
They had just been freed from slavery. They had just left
it was also Passover time. It would be weird that we're celebrating
I know.
this fall feast.
I know. But it's just kind of interesting
Yeah.
that God says, you shall dwell in tents, or you should dwell in booths.
But he says to remember your time in the wilderness.
It is, well, that is the wilderness. Sukkot is not, you're leaving, it's just outside of
It
civilization.
wasn't wilderness.
Well, it wasn't like in the middle of nowhere.
It wasn't wilderness.
Yeah, it says it was near the edge of the wilderness.
Right.
So, anyway, just an interesting observation. And the reason I find it interesting is God says to rejoice, as if you're remembering something that's very joyous. Well, if you were a slave your entire life, and you just got freed, and you've got all this golden loot from Egypt, and all these cattle and herd, and you've got all this unleavened bread on your shoulders for a long trip, and you're just like, woohoo! I mean, talk about joy. I don't know, just kind of an interesting observation.
It is.
So maybe God was actually saying, remember the time when your ancestors were in Sukkot. You had just been freed, you've got all this wealth, you are no longer a slave, you have this Savior that just saved you. You haven't had the terror of the Egyptian army about to slaughter you by the Red Sea yet. That's yet to come.
That's coming, yeah.
And they haven't done their 10 times of testing yet. So
yeah, they haven't learned about plagues and getting wiped out because they tested God's patience.
So really, the very first station, Sukkot, would have been the first time that they camped without testing God. Because they started testing God pretty much right at the Red Sea, so it didn't take long before things started going the wrong way. Anyway, remember when things were good.
When there was joy because you were set free from slavery.
Right.
How did that mosquito survive?
There's a mosquito?
Yes. It survived freezing weather and it's
I don't
flying
see a
around.
mosquito.
It left.
Well, we should kill it. Anyway, that was an interesting
one
observation having to do with connecting Sukkot with joy, with remembering your time in the wilderness, when things were good between the house of Israel or the sons of Israel and God, because they had just been rescued. They had just been... Now, technically, I think they did kind of complain against God when Pharaoh had to gave them no straw. Remember that?
Right, but that wasn't after they were free. That was when they were still slaves.
Anyway, that was my aha moment today, and I don't know if that's conclusive, but it's an interesting connection.
It is an interesting connection. The other thing we were talking about was we've had conversations with our family and people around us about, why are we doing this goofy thing where we're staying out in a tent, especially when it's uncomfortable and cold. A lot of people have worried about us, like, well, the question we keep getting, what if you did have the baby? It's like, well, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
What if?
We're not going to do anything that is going to endanger the baby.
People have had babies in tents all throughout history.
But, having been through the 35-degree nights, I'm really not sure it would have been safe to have a newborn out here.
And the truth is, if we did have a baby, first of all, we would not have it in a tent.
No.
Not when we're at home. That's why we didn't go anywhere.
That's why we're at home.
And if we had a newborn, we would not subject our newborn to 30-some degree weather out in a tent.
No.
We just wouldn't do that.
Because God hasn't put us in a situation where it's a clear emergency that needs to happen.
Right.
So that was one thing that was happening where people were worrying about us being out in weather. The other thing was we were discussing whether or not it should be done. It's interesting that the feedback that I got from some family members is basically, well, that's uncomfortable. I don't want to do that. I don't want to, I don't want to be in a tent. I don't like camping. I don't, my back hurts if I have to sleep on the ground
I don't know, that's kind of complaining before even being in the situation.
I don't really think it was complaining. It was more that, do we really have to do this? And
that's an indication that you don't want to do it.
Well, most people don't. And I kept trying to say, I'm not a big camper. Let's put it, I'm not a camper at all. I don't think I would ever choose to just go camping for the fun of it.
Well, camping in our backyard's a lot easier than...
Well, that's way easier. But it's not like I would plan a vacation and say, oh, this will be fun, let's go camping. That's just not me at this point in time. Part of it is having the small children.
But do you remember when we were practicing? It was
Yeah.
before our first Sukkot to go to Arkansas.
But I wasn't doing that for the fun of it. I was doing it because we had to practice.
And actually, it wasn't very easy. We had some difficulties even practicing.
Yeah. Well, because we'd never done it before.
And I thought it would be a lot easier. See, I have memories of camping with my family where Mom and Dad did all the work.
Right.
I was just
You
along
go
for the
along
ride.
as a kid.
So now that I'm in charge and Lauren's in charge, we're actually setting up the tent. We're keeping things in order. We're coming up with events.
You have to make sure everyone's fed and kept warm.
And when you have a lot of children,
So-
camping is a lot more work.
It is.
It just is. And if you're trying to camp over Sabbaths, then it's another big challenge.
Right. You have to get everything ready ahead of time. So anyway, my thought was that I kept having people tell me how they didn't want to do this because of how uncomfortable it would be. And I was thinking, I think the real question here is, if you're convicted to do something, then either you put up with the discomfort of it, or you say, what can I do to make this better? Because I know God wants me to do it. So how can I make it so that it's not such a difficult thing for me to do? How do I learn to stay warm so that I'm not cold all the time? How do I learn to keep from getting soaking wet when it rains? Because there's ways to do that.
But we're commanded to have joy no matter what the circumstances are.
We are, but it's helpful in having joy if you conquer the challenges that are making it difficult to have the joy.
Just bring it back to just normal comfort level. It doesn't have to be luxurious.
Right. You don't want to be soaked when it rains.
You just want to be dry and warm. That's really it.
Right. And so I was thinking about it, and it's similar to when you start thinking about eating the way God said to eat, and there's people who will say, I won't eat that way. I won't give up my bacon. Bacon.
Right.
And it's like, but if you really believe the creator of the universe says this is important and you should do it, then it doesn't really matter if you like bacon or not. That's kind of an ancillary thing. I mean, if you don't believe that it's that important, then you're going to say, I would rather just eat my bacon. That's not that important to me. But I think what happens is when you have the conviction that something is important, the other stuff of, I don't like camping, becomes, how do I make this camping not a really difficult thing for me to do?
I think sometimes people look at, I mean, if we're doing something unusual, they look at us and they basically are saying, but do we have to? And
or they say, you must like doing that.
And I don't think that's really the question, do you have to? I mean, if someone doesn't want to, then you ought not do it. You really should look at it as, should I do it? And what attitude should I have about doing it? And if you have a bad attitude about doing it, fix the attitude first.
Right. You can't go into something that God wants you to do with a terrible attitude and then say, and I had a rotten time besides.
If you go in with a bad attitude, every disaster you can think of, every discomfort that you're thinking of will happen, guaranteed.
You will end up like the people of Israel. You're going to murmur and complain and whine,
right.
And something is going to happen to you.
And actually, the whole point, I think, of Sukkot is to overcome obstacles and discomforts and not complain.
I think a lot of the point about practicing Sukkot every year is to learn about how easy it is to murmur.
Oh, yeah.
How easy it is to get caught up in discomforts and forget to have the joy God wants you to have, or make it so that you get caught up in your well-being and you forget what God maybe wants you to do. And that has been one of the things we've been pondering about. It's like, we're not out here because we really enjoy camping in our backyard in October when we're 40 weeks pregnant.
Well, speak for yourself. I mean, I'm not 40 weeks pregnant.
But that doesn't mean I'm not enjoying the time. It just means I'm not doing this because it's something that I just love to do. It's something that there's a conviction to do. When there's a conviction to do it, you do what you have to make it work.
And actually, again, this is because we're doing it at home. But when you do it at home, we have luxuries that we don't have necessarily when we're traveling.
I take the kids in the house in the morning for everyone to go to the bathroom and warm up.
Well, just simply having electricity, really. I mean,
that's just huge, yeah.
And we bring some of the things that we're accustomed to inside the house and bring them into the tent.
Yeah, like our kids listen to Bible every night while they're sleeping. And if you can hear it right now, they're listening to that right now while they're sleeping.
And, we have a fan noise thing, a white noise thing. It's just, so all the comforts of home are just brought right into the tent.
For the most part.
And we can't really do that if we're off grid or somewhere.
Right. So, but that's us making it as comfortable as possible within the restrictions that we have.
But, you know, despite all of those comforts, it still can get uncomfortable anyway.
I would still like to pick up and go sleep in my own bed at night. You know,
It's true.
right there.
It's true. You know, the blankets and the pillows don't become like ice.
The other thing that I think was occurring to me in these conversations I was having was I had family members who are struggling with whether or not we should celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. And finally I said, it's really not a question of whether you celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. The question is, who do we think we are? Do we think we are grafted into the house of Israel and the house of Judah by our faith in Messiah, and therefore we become part of this covenant? We become part of the things that God said, this is what I want my family to do. Or are we not? Are we outside altogether? And if we're outside altogether, then there is much less purpose in doing things like keeping the Sabbath. Because the reason many of the people like I know and my family will keep the Sabbath is because they say, well, God instituted that from creation, and he told his people he wanted them to do it, and so it's a good idea for us to listen in and to do that. And this is true. But the only reason you would do that is because you're part of God's family.
And you can't look at God's commandments and take, you know, put them all in a petri dish one by one and analyze it to say, should we do it?
Should we do this one? Should we do that one? The answer is...
Because in the end, you end up just kind of picking and choosing.
Right. Which feels the least foreign to you, which feels the most, you know...
It's not a buffet.
Doable. You know.
You know, when you go to a buffet and you got this nice big long tray of various foods, you're like, what do I want to eat? I think I'll get a little spoonful of this, spoonful of that, but no, I'm not going to do that. That's too foreign to me.
So I think the question is not whether or not you should do something for the Feast of Tabernacles. The question is, who do you see yourself as? Who do you believe you are? Who are you in Messiah if you are a Gentile and not a born Jew? And who are you in relationship to God himself? If your Father, God, has taken you as part of his family because of your faith in him and in his Son, and he says, these are things that I've set up for you. I want you to eat this way. I want you to remember these days. I want you to live a certain way because this is the way I made you to live. Then all of these things are covered under the same blanket. You don't ask yourself, should I celebrate Feast of Tabernacles or not? You say, how should I do these things that God said to do?
Mm-hmm. And not only that, but these are things that Yeshua did.
Yes.
I mean, Paul very explicitly says we should walk the way Yeshua walked. Jesus walked.
Right.
So when he's doing these things, now we can't technically fulfill it the way he did, because he went to where God's name was placed.
But the question is, do you honor the commandment to the best of your ability?
Exactly right.
Do you give it weight?
And we do. We give it weight.
Right.
You know.
So really, I finally realized the question is not, should I study up and decide whether or not to keep the Feast of Tabernacles? That's almost, it's not beside the point, but it's a secondary question to, who are you in Messiah? And if you understand who you are in Messiah, that will lead you to decide what to do about things like keeping Sukkot.
And you shouldn't have, you shouldn't have somebody telling you to do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, most people, when it comes to making decisions to do biblical things, it's not usually somebody saying you ought to do these things. Usually it's reading the scripture and saying, whoa,
this is something God wants.
This is important. God's telling me to do this thing.
Right.
I mean, you're not going to be convicted because some man or woman tells you to do something. That's why Ben and Lauren are not pointing to our audience saying, you should be keeping the Feast of Tabernacles.
I would hope that, actually I've come to hope that everybody I know and love would, because I think there is tremendous blessing in it. And yes, there can be plenty of discomforts, and I'll be the first one to tell you that I'm not always comfortable. But there is so much to learn, and there is so much freedom that comes from when you decide, I'm no longer going to pick and choose what God told me to do. I'm going to take everything God said as good. And the question is not, should I do this? The question is it available for me to do? So
I think that if you talk to almost anyone and you ask them, is the Feast of Tabernacles good? And they'll say, well, it's in the Bible. God said to do it. Then, okay, yes. Most people would say, yeah, it's good. Now it gets a little more personal when you say, but is it good for you?
Should you leave your house behind and go camp out in the backyard?
That's when things get a little more dicey. It's like, well, good for them, not so good for me.
It's not really a salvation issue.
Not a salvation issue. I don't have to. So we don't want to be presumptuous in doing these things. It's like, well,
who are you in Messiah?
Right.
What family do you belong to?
And if it's good, why would it be bad?
And do we have the responsibility to pick and choose what of God's commandments we ought to do? Or are we, as a people of God, God-fearers, people who follow the Creator of the universe, are we then bound to Him as His adopted children, or even His slaves we're described to,
right,
to follow in His ways and to walk in His road? And if you see yourself that way, as you are bound to this person, this incredibly wonderful person who is the Creator of the universe, and He said, this is mine, walk in my ways. It doesn't matter if you get cold when you camp at night. You say, but the Creator of the universe says this was good to do.
Right. It really comes down to this is good.
And that's why I can tell Elena, no, you're not going to sleep in the house. Why not? Because God said this was important.
And when God says something is good, and you say, yes, I agree, this is good, we should do this, that's the tree of life.
Because we are no longer deciding for ourselves.
It's not our own knowledge of
good and
evil that's good and evil. It's God told us to do it.
We're resting on God said this is good.
God said it's good. And whether it doesn't matter what my opinion is, we could all day long saying, this isn't good, it's raining. This isn't good, the wind is blowing. This isn't good, I'm freezing. It's like, no, God said this is good. What you are going through is good, and rest easy and do it. And we do it.
And do it cheerfully and do it joyfully. And maybe we won't always understand what God wanted us to do here, but we do know that He is wonderful and the things that He tells us to do are good, and we want to be His family. We want to be His children. We want to walk on His road, walk in His ways, and that means there is no picking and choosing, should we do this or should we do that. The question is only for us, has become for us, how can we best do what God said He wanted done?
Yep. And it's a process, and it takes practice.
Right. So, 47 minutes talking about one subject.
Well, we're comfortable. We're sitting on this nice hay bale, and
right.
We got our lights that we're trying to keep active.
Keep waving at the lights.
But I think this is probably a good point to
go get our warm pajamas on and
get into our nice cozy little tent attached to our sukkah.
Here, let's see if I can show everybody what this looks like here, just for kicks and giggles. Here's the backyard.
I don't think you can see the campfire anymore.
Probably not. And then we're sitting on our couch that we've made out of hay bales and blankets. Now over here we have our tent. And you probably cannot see very well inside the tent, but if you could, you'd see 3 little people lined up sleeping on a memory foam there with their sleeping bags, and another one is sleeping next to them. So
we have one table set up,
and we have along this other wall.
You really can't see.
We have our all-purpose table. There are candles on it. It's actually it's quite pleasant. We've really been enjoying our evenings outside. So I don't know how much you can see of that, but that was everything.
A little sukkah tour.
And maybe with that.
All right, I think that's a good kickoff, and I'm gonna give a big thumbs up. Thumbs up in the light or the dark.
This might be one of our longer ones.
That's okay. Say goodnight, Lauren.
Good night, Lauren.